Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here to share with you a little bit about what we're doing from a traceability standpoint in the US. It's so great to hear how everybody comes together. That's part of the lessons, and part of my speech today is about how powerful it is when industry comes together. And it's obviously happening all around the world, which is really powerful. So on the next slide, just from a GS1 US perspective, we have antitrust. It's basically, we don't talk about pricing, margins, anything like that. And it really allows everybody to come together, even competitors, to solve business problems together. So let's get started. On the next slide is just the quick agenda. I'm going to very quickly run through the import process from a wine perspective. I am not the expert at this, so I'm not going to pretend to be. I'll run through some industry examples that we have done coming together as industry from a government perspective, from an association perspective, and also from a brand, from a retailer and operator perspective from the food space. I'll go through a few regulations that are happening right now in the US and will affect globally as well. And then some future work. I know that you all are actually ahead of us in the 2D moves, 2D barcode moves to get extended data on there, but I'll just share with you what we're doing from our perspective. So let's get started. So on the next slide, from the import perspective, to bring wine, really to bring anything, but to bring wine into the US, there's a lot of different pieces of information that needs to be included. The importer's permit, the certificate of label approval, all of that information about the product that's coming in, all of that paperwork. I'm not going to go into all of those details because the regulations are in place and we know that it's kind of a conundrum of information that needs to come in. From a state perspective, interstate trade in the US, every state has their own alcohol beverage control. So each state is independently run, and there's also local requirements as well. I spent about 15 years in the beer industry, and even with all of that, it's a bit of a puzzle who can manage the different regulations, both because it's state and local. I would go into stores and try to front face beer, and I know it was the same in the wine. And in some states we could, in some regions we could, and some we couldn't touch that. So there's a lot of different regulations here on who can deliver when, who can touch it, what kind of paperwork, how the payments process. Does it have to be cash on delivery or other payment terms? So from an alcohol process perspective and delivery, there's just a lot to it. I know that this is super simple, right? So you have the physical flow of goods on the top. So you have that trade item. So let's just pretend that's wine. It goes from the manufacturer to the distributor to the operator. Super simple. And then you have that information flow on the bottom. When you think of all of that paperwork from each one of those steps, the label requirements, the invoice, the price lists, how amazing would it be if that physical flow on top matches the informational flow on the bottom? I know this isn't in place today. When we talk about traceability and authentication, this picture would help us move closer to reality of that nirvana, especially when we start talking about interoperability, that self-education that Jonathan was talking about. How can we allow all of these different players in the supply chain to gather this information so that ultimately we can get the products to where they want to go and the consumer can get them and start getting that information around them. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. We're all looking for this nirvana. And I think just by all coming together, we're all going to be continuing to make steps forward. So the next slide, I'm just going to start talking about the industry partnerships that we've had from a GS1 US perspective. We've spent a lot of time working with industry to bring awareness to the standards, but more importantly, on the next page, we bring these communities together. Because we're neutral and not for profit, I, as an employee of the company who made Budweiser, could sit in the same room as the company who made Miller Coors and have a business conversation. And it was just so very powerful. So again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's just so awesome to be able to come together and figure out how to solve these problems. On the next slide, there's some partnerships that we've had in place for a very long time. And then there's some that are new and will kind of come in and come out. The Produce Traceability Initiative, which is on the top, are these 4 industry associations that came together in about 2006 after a spinach outbreak, because there was a need for that produce space, for that leafy green space, to really have some additional traceability information. They came together with the growers, with the retailers, to say, okay, what is needed? And after all these years, the Produce Traceability Initiative continues to work together to increase traceability. We've just recently kicked off some what's next work groups, because we know that things are changing very quickly and we're going to have more and more needs for that additional information and to be able to more quickly track products where they are in a very fast manner. The USDA branded foods product database, that is where consumers can get information, actually regulators can get information about branded foods. So this has been something that's been going on for a while, and it's with these associations, organizations, and the government as well, to bring that very transparent information to the consumer. The leafy green pilot that's in the middle, I'll go into it a little bit of detail. We know, and I'll go into, I have a couple slides on the 204 regulation, the Food Safety Modernization Act 204 regulation. But what we wanted to do here, and we brought some industry groups together, 6 associations and many players in the industry, to really test it out. Can we go from that consumer on the right side, instead of starting with the grower on the left side, or the manufacturer, or the vineyard, and get from a receipt all the way back to that place where that product was made? And the answer was yes. But there was a lot of business information that folks didn't necessarily understand, because they were brought in cold, just like it happens in the real world. So it was really great to be able to come together as an association with other associations and their members and say, okay, this could work, but we need alignment on standardized data. We need strong collaboration between these industries associations and industry experts to push all of this work forward so that we're all successful as a group. This doesn't give us any competitive advantage. Let's figure out how to fix it. On the next slide is something called Smart Label. So in 2015, 2 organizations came together. It was actually called the Trading Partner Alliance then, when CBA, Consumer Brands Association, and FMI came together to create something to give the consumer additional visibility to information. So back to that self-educating about products. It's a platform that allows a consumer to go into a website. So it's smartlabel.org, or scan. There's a smart label barcode on many of the, if I can even get this to work, on many of the products that are sold. And when you scan it with your phone, it just brings up a page and you can go get any kind of information that you want about that product, including things like if it's kosher, if it's USDA organic, and any other regulated certifications that need to be there. There's about 76 companies right now, 1,000 brands, and 92,000 products in that database, and growing. It's a huge combination of these 2 organizations coming together with the brands to really give consumers that additional information. And then on the next slide, we go to our very popular case studies. So we know that when organizations do case studies, we all benefit, because they're doing something in their 4 walls that we may not think about. So when we're reading case studies, well, it can be wordy maybe, there's just some really great facts that we can get, and maybe best practices. So Ocean Mist is a produce manufacturer here in the US that produces artichokes, and they implemented the GS1 128 barcode, which has some additional information in it. And they were really able to get operational efficiencies, transparency, and additional safety in place. And they continue to use that. IPC Subway Subway is the sandwich brand, has really changed the way they've done business using the standards. And they have this additional traceability, and then they can leverage that for things like inventory management. So now I'm going to move on to something that's closer to home for you all. So on the next slide, I'm going to run through what we did a couple years ago with the meat messaging portal that was used in Australia. It was introduced to the U.S. Food Safety Inspection Services, and a pilot was born. I say that, but it was many, many conversations and visits that the team, and not necessarily myself, but the team did to U.S. import houses with the USDA, with different manufacturers, with Australian meat brands to be able to get this to fruition. So if we quickly run through the process and how the organizations came together, we know on the left that livestock runs through the process from the farm to the processing and then to distribution. And all of these processes have monitoring involved throughout the food safety, to ensure that food safety is intact. On the next slide, we know that distribution then means product, in this case, goes into a shipping container and moves across the ocean to here in the US. The USDA inspectors meet the container at the import center and manually create these shipping marks or stamps for each and every box on the pallet and the ship, which is a very time-consuming process. And it was really ready for what, that Nirvana picture was. So I'm not going to run into the next slide in very much detail. And Des Bowler, who I know participates a lot in these organizations, can go into very much detail about it. But know that by all of this information, so you have the information about what's on the pallet, what's on the container, and all of that information is sent via an advanced ship notice to meat messaging. And then when it gets to the US, you pull that up in a handheld. And it's really cool and really powerful. On the next slide, you can see what happened. So on the left-hand side is each one of those boxes has that shipping mark. On the right side, they're able to do one because that information was sent electronically. So this is still in pilot here in the US. They're continuing to move it forward, but it was very well received, and I think will continue expanding. So I'm actually going to move down to the regulations side. So if you go to the next slide, many of you I know have heard about the work that the FDA here is doing for food safety. We have a couple different initiatives. One is called the New Era of Smarter Food Safety, which is how the FDA is seeing the next 10 years. So what do we need to do now to become a more tech-enabled supply chain for food safety in the next decade? FSMA 204, Food Safety Modernization Act, has a proposed rule out there that is supposed to be finalized in November. We're all kind of holding our collective breath. That will have more enhanced tracking and recording of the movement of products through its life cycle. It's much more broad than what we have in place today, which is one up and one down. It's really based, though, on what we all already talk about. So critical tracking events and key data elements. So there's a ton of discussion on both of these, most of which are particularly worried about 204 since that's time bound and it's a regulation. We at GS1 US have several work groups that are working together to figure out, okay, what the heck does all of this mean? Are we using the standards already today? What can we use? What can we leverage? And what do we kind of need to stand up new to be ready for what we think is going to happen in November? After November, the rule will go into place and organizations will have 2 years. And we all know that 2 years just goes so super quickly. We're trying to get ahead of whatever we can. The next slide goes into a proof of concept that we are doing with CBP here in the US. And Australia is one of the countries that is working on this as well. So the Customs and Border Protection group is working on a global business identifier, that's the GBI, I should have spelled it out, I'm so very sorry, program. And they are looking to streamline the identifiers that they're using in their systems because there's a ton right now. So they're going to test 3, GLN is one of them, LEI, and then DUNS number. It's a 3-year pilot with these countries on these product categories below, wine being one of them. And they're going to be able to much more easily identify locations and bring these product categories into the country. Moving just real quickly, because I know I'm almost out of time. What are we doing in the future? So the next slide runs through what we're calling in the US Sunrise 2027, which is industry moving together to allow the 2D barcode to go beep at point of sale with just a GTIN by 2027. And while that should be an easy feat, it is not, because we know that there's hundreds and thousands and probably millions of point of sale systems that are already in place, and all of those need to be upgraded. So when we think about this, it's not just the grocery stores, it's the small convenience stores, it's even maybe apparel stores that sell something else in there that could have a 2D barcode that need to have that additional information, additional ability to scan. On the next slide, we just talk about the different use case opportunities beyond point of sale, things like inventory management, traceability, safety, sustainability. That's something that's already come up this morning. What can we do to allow consumers to have more information from a consumer engagement perspective? I just love the idea of having this 2D barcode, not only have smart label, but have point of sale information and have lot, batch, and date, so that one barcode can enable all of this from end to end. It is just so very powerful. And I know we're all getting excited about it here. It's something that you already have, I know. And just to wrap it up, I know that if you've seen a GS1 presentation before, you've probably seen this slide. I'm not going to go through it, but just keep in mind that it looks like a very busy slide, but these standards are out here to help streamline business processes, to create that nirvana, to bring these, groups of people and organizations together to help move traceability forward, whether it's the wine industry, table grapes, or what have you, to really bring us together to do business in a more effective, more streamlined way, and then get the consumers the information they're looking for. So with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you so much.